I think we're good to get started. So thank you all for joining. We're here to talk about what's new in 19.4 and really what that means for you in terms of value and additional functionality. So on the webinar with me today, I have Ryan Schlosser. He manages the support team. So I'm going to talk first about kind of what's new in 19.4. We'll show you some of the workflows and some of what that means inside the interface. And then we'll kick it over to Ryan to kind of walk through the update and upgrade process. So let's talk about kind of what's new in 19.4 in generalities here, right? So there's several new things. Probably the biggest thing to me is going to be the ability to pull in cloud flow logs from Azure. Now, today we have, prior to 19.4, we've been able to pull flow logs in from AWS. So if you're taking advantage of that today, it's very similar in how it works for Azure. We did, however, make some optimizations in AWS Cloud Log Ingestion. So if you are doing that today, expect much better performance in 19.4 in terms of how much flow logs you can pull back from AWS and how quickly they can be read and reported on. Now, that's really important for a number of reasons, right? One is allows you to pull more from flow from the cloud. Cloud is obviously a place a lot of organizations are migrating to. So having the ability to pull from multiple sources, AWS and now Azure, is something that is obviously quite valuable to many customers. The other thing that's new in 19.4 is we've enhanced some workflows. I'm going to show you those kind of firsthand today in a few minutes, but we've designed some additional views within the standard workflow from the alarm monitor page all the way through to the reports to give you additional context much quicker. So as you're investigating any type of scenario, whether it's a network ops, bandwidth or latency issue, or more of a security focused, a data exfiltration or malicious tool transfer type detection, we're going to be able to show you more context around those. We also have some additional changes in the admin section. So again, if you're familiar with any of the 19 versions, and if you go into the admin panel, you're going to be reverted to the classic UI. 19.4 is the first version. We've actually started rolling some of those features into the new UI. So in the admin panel now, you'll have a new UI view. But on top of that, we added some additional functionality in terms of how we deploy and manage a lot of the flow algorithms. And again, we'll touch on that a little bit more as we go through today. So with that, let me spin over to the website, to our demo environment, and I'm kind of walk you through kind of some of the stuff we just touched on. So we'll start with probably the most important thing, and that is the cloud flow log ingestion, right? So what does that mean for you in terms of a workflow? Well, there's obviously workflows within our tool set that can take advantage of that data, but I want to talk a little bit about workflows in your environment and how this impacts your monitoring and management of those workflows. Now that we can pull in stuff from Azure, that means that any critical application that either fully or partially has workflows tied in or around Azure, we can monitor from end to end. So in this example here, I've got a dashboard that we've created that shows an online ordering process for some generic, retail customer, right? So what we're doing is they have a web server hosted in Azure that the public accesses, and so first step you want to do is you want to make sure that access into Azure is there, that Azure is up, running. Analytics show that it's present and accessible. And so the very first graph we have here is just a graph of traffic in and out of our Azure instance. We are breaking this report down by the entities and what they're accessing. So we're looking at external is going to be mostly customers that are accessing services, most likely the web server in our web server cluster within our Azure environment. We're also looking at cloud assets within Azure, accessing internal infrastructure to our environment, as well as internal personnel accessing additional Azure assets. So it's a very generic Azure in and out report, and that is because I want to know firsthand how is Azure operating. Do we have traffic in there? If this traffic starts dipping, I'll see that in this graph. That's an indication to me that we have a greater Azure related issue. The next step in that workflow would be, well, how is the online ordering server performing? So the next graph I have here is we're looking at number of unique external IPs accessing that resource in any given period of time. Right. So I can do from this, I can say, hey, it's holding pretty steady, looking good. If I see a dip in this, that's an indication that there's an issue. obviously would then look at the other graph and see is there a dip in their graph as well, right? And from that, I can draw conclusions. And then the last part of that workflow, obviously, is as it transitions on-prem and then branches out to the retail stores. So in this case, I've got two additional reports down here. One's around application latency that's showing me the application performance of the critical applications tied to this process, whether it's the web server performance, whether it's the database SQL backend on our side, or whether it's the point of sale or other systems tied to this process. And then, of course, the store performance as well, right? Each store is pulling in and fetching their orders or having orders pushed to them via this workflow. And so if I can understand, does the store go down, or is there extreme latency at a store that's affecting this process, that can be an indication that there's a problem we need to solve, and can dive into that. So just kind of recap real quick from a web Azure viewpoint here. We have the ability now to monitor traffic in and out of Azure. We continue to have access into visibility in and out of AWS. And with that, you can build reports and interfaces to show you, again, critical application workflows. And there's more use cases tied to that, but that's just one example I wanted to share with you. Now let's pivot for a second and look a little bit at what this means maybe from a security workflow standpoint. So we have made a couple of changes to this workflow. The click-throughs are the same, but the context we're going to provide you is a little bit different. A little more rich, a little more data now available as you navigate through this. So the first thing I want to show you is on the alarm monitor page, we've made some changes and really giving you some options on how you want to view these alerts. So these cards here can be changed. By default, they are indicating the number of events that we've seen based on criticality. You can change this to host. In fact, one of my favorite views is to view this as a host with the host tab. This gives you more of a host-centric view of what alerts or presence via host. Another view that's really, really nice in this is our connections view. So I can, by looking at how things are connected from a propagation of event standpoint, this tells me, hey, I've got some critical alerts that all tie back to one host. So this host has generated some alerts, but in doing that, it's affected other hosts, and those hosts have generated alerts related to this alert. So this is a real great quick way for me to see, hey, I have one host that's obviously having some issues here. I can go investigate that host directly and cut right to the information I need. So as part of this workflow, we updated our ability to look at a timeline perspective for hosts, right? So really a lot of work around the host-centric view in this release. So this view tells me a number of things around this host that we just clicked on. One, it gives me this timeline view. So I can look at it and say, oh, well, there's lateral movement. Maybe I had an alert that was triggered on that was sent to my SIM, and I've come back and looked at it here. But I can see it wasn't the first thing, right? We had a host reputation, right? And we can look at this in a little bit here. But the other thing I want to draw your attention to is we pull in now context from our endpoint analytics side, right? So we're able to tell you who's logged into this host. In this case, it was Dwight. When did they log in? When's the last time we saw activity from this host? Where are they connected? What's their MAC address? What type of device are they on? This is all information we can glean now from this one singular view. And let's look back at this timeline, right? So as I mentioned, this timeline gives us an idea as how, in this case, this attack is unfolding. And I can go, you know what? I'm going to go look at the very first thing that happened. So the very first thing was this host reputation. So I can click on host reputation and immediately know, hey, this asset visited a malicious IP, a malicious website. I have the name of the site here. I have what threat list it was on. So again, helps me add context to this understanding. I know what kind of device it is because I had endpoint analytics data on the last page. And I know who's logged in. So I'm already starting to draw conclusions as to, hey, is this legit? What are my next step I need to take? Now from here, I can say, okay, well, the next things that happened, we had a bunch of things around reconnaissance. So, okay, I see there's some recon things that have happened. And then lastly, it kind of culminated into a lateral movement style behavior, right? So I am able to navigate in through our standard workflows and look at the actual traffic, right? That looks something very similar to this little icon, which I'm sure you're all familiar with if you've used this tool before, right? So this isn't anything new. This will take me into the report where I can then, once I'm in the report view, start accessing and navigating that report based on filters that I apply, thresholds, calendar, you name it, I can start modifying this view, right? However, there are some new things on this page I want to talk about as well. So first off, we did kind of consolidate a bunch of your options now into the top right corner. In previous versions, they've been kind of in different places. You had some things on the left, filters maybe, you had some things on the right. Calendar options were either in a subpanel or exposed on the page. Now it's all in the top right corner. So it makes it really easy to, as you move your mouse, it's always upper right. And as someone who uses it a lot, I greatly appreciate that change because it saves me from having to remember which corner I need to navigate to. Right, so I have my calendar options, filter options to add additional filters, your options for adding things like graph, row, numbers, totals versus averages, things like that. Saving and exporting. It's all up in the top right corner. And then maybe I think the other thing that's worth mentioning here is as we start looking at the admin panel, right? I mentioned that the admin panel did get some new, bring into the new UI. So you'll notice so far as I've clicked on a lot of these little filters and other things, we're getting slide out trays on the right. That's the general theme now with 19.4. We're kind of moving towards this slide out tray approach where when you want to look at options or anything of that nature, it's typically going to be a slide out tray on the right-hand side. So it becomes pretty easy to use the different pages as you get used to it being a slide out mechanic. Right. But this new UI is in here. I'm not going to go through all the settings here. It's very similar to the classic. They've just been moved into the slide out tray. One thing I will tell you as just I guess a tip, if you will, is some things have moved around. Like for example, if you want to go look at your licensing, you normally would go to settings in the old classic UI, and there's no licensing here. It's down under Plixer. So what you can do is use this search box. This has been one of my best friends with this release. Is just type in license and you'll get the licensing pop up. All right, so I can navigate right to it that way. So you can kind of search your submenus for links. But the one thing that did actually get added in terms of new functionality is this concept of security groups. I want to touch on that briefly. Right. So for those of you who have enabled or played around with flow analytics, right, things like DDoS detections, looking at scan behavior detections, or any of the other detections we provide as part of that mechanism. One thing that I've always struggled as I'm working with customers is when you want to turn some of these on, it can be, depending on the size of your network, it can be a pretty laborious process to go through and add exporters to every single algorithm, determining which ones need to be added, which ones don't need to be added, right? Is it a core exporter? Is it a firewall, right? What kind of traffic is it seeing? And then making those decisions. And then exclusions, right? I need to add maybe my Nessus or vulnerability scanners as exclusions for these. I need to add these other set of hosts for exclusions for these others. And so it can be a kind of a process to get that all ironed out, and it can take some time. So what we did is we introduced this thing called security groups. And what security groups does is it's a way to categorize your exporters into different buckets. So for example, I can define all my firewalls into this firewall group. Then when I turn on a flow analytic algorithm, these are already pre-assigned as to where they should be from a best practice standpoint. So by making assignments here, I mean effectively taking care of what needs to be added to which flow analytics configuration. And then lastly, if I can show you with that, what that looks like is as I'm turning on flow analytics, we'll just take maybe FinScan as an example. You'll see I've got additional exclusions. So as I mentioned, things like vulnerability scanners, right? We now have a group built for vulnerability scanners. So you can go through and define, that's an IP group. If you're, for those of you familiar with IP groups, you can define your vulnerability scanners in that IP group, and it's already added to the appropriate exclusion list here. Same with public Wi-Fi, right? You define your public Wi-Fi subnets or ranges, and we'll exclude public Wi-Fi from things like some of these detections. Right. So one, it's going to help you speed up implementation of these detections. It's going to make it more accurate, so you get less false positives, and ultimately make your lives easier because there's less things to go chase down when you get alerts on these things. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what's new in 19.4. A look at some of the workflows. I think I'll kick it over now to Ryan to walk through the update process. Ryan's all yours.
Yeah, excellent. Before I steal the screen share from you, so everyone is aware, when you're looking at the web interface for Scrutinizer, if you look up in the top right-hand corner, you have a little question mark icon. If you click on that icon, that's going to bring you to the documentations page, our online manual. So if anytime you're using a new feature and you're not sure quite how to use it, you can always click on that link to bring up the manual. So what I'll do is I will steal this screen share here. All right, there we go. So when you click on that icon, whatever version of Scrutinizer you currently have installed is the version of the manual that's going to be pulled up when you click on that. So if you're on 19.3.2, it will show up as the 19.3.2 manual. So what I'm going to talk about now is the update process and some of the caveats involved here. So if you are on an older version, you use that link to get to the documentations page. You'll have to come down to this bottom section here where it says latest, and you'll have to change this to be the 19.4 version. If you're on an older version, that's how you update to look at the 19.4 manual. So the manual has the same feature it's had for a long time. If you're looking for a specific feature, you can search that throughout or in this search the documents option. If you have a question on IP groups, you can type in IP groups, and when you search for that, it's going to pull up all the results for that particular search. So what we're looking for is the update and upgrade section. So we can, again, search for that if we need to, but underneath advanced services, we have the updates and upgrades option. And the reason why I start here is because the manual is laid out in such a way that it leads you through all of the different processes that are required to get the system upgraded to the latest version. So we start with the update preparations, and then we jump into the upgrade process itself, and then any supporting information will always be linked at right after that. So we'll start here with the upgrade preparations. I won't read through this whole thing for you. I'll let you kind of go through it on your own, but if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to support. So the first thing we want to do is make sure that the version of Scrutinizer we're on currently is able to update directly to the newest version. So version 18.20 is the only version 18 that can upgrade directly to 19.4. And then you can upgrade from any of the 19 versions directly to the newest. That will be the same moving forward for many versions in the future, but know that you need to be on either 18.20 or any version of the early 19s. Once we've verified the version, that's when we need to decide on how we're going to take a backup of this appliance. We have a few different options. The first option for our virtual appliance users is a simple snapshot. Snapshotting the appliance is the quickest, simplest, easiest way to revert if something were to go wrong. So we always recommend a snapshot beforehand. For the hardware appliances, we have to do this a little bit more manual. We have 2 scripts that are included with all version 19s that can take backups at different levels depending on your risk level. So we have a full backup. This will back up all configurations on the system. This is IP groups and your users, user groups, any saved reports or dashboards you have, and all of your historical data is done as part of that full backup. If the data is not as important and the configurations are, we have a configuration only backup. This, again, all configurations on the system that are required to get this backup and running afterwards, if something were to happen, will be saved in that configurations. Another thing to note here is that the full database backup, because we are taking a backup of all of your historical data, it does require as much disk space as you're currently using. So if your appliance is using 100 gigs for historical data, it's going to take 100 gigs to make that backup. So the amount of available space is important. On our hardware appliance users, we like to have access to the iDRAC interface from the Dell hardware. This is if we were to lose connection through SSH for whatever reason, iDRAC has a virtual console that we can connect to for any type of troubleshooting. Once we have a backup, we then need to understand if this appliance has access to the internet, or more specifically, files.plixer.com. A good way to test this is to curl down the checksums file directly from files.plixer.com repository, and this just verifies that we have access to that location. After this, we want to check on our sizing guides. So any Scrutinizer appliance that is currently running version 19 should have the required base minimum specs for 19.4. If you have a question, we have a link directly to Scrutinizer sizing guide, which goes through understanding things like your flow rate, number of exporters, and the amount of RAM CPU that would be required to run with those exporters, as well as how much disk space based off of your historical data. We don't need to go through everything here, but distributed install. So if you are running with a primary reporting server, as well as a distributed collector or two, and that traffic happens to go through a firewall, more specifically the Palo Alto, we want to make sure that we have the ability to communicate through that Palo Alto. We've seen issues in the past where the Palo Alto firewalls see our connections as part of the upgrade as some sort of breach attempt. So if you do have Palo Alto firewalls in between your reporter and your collectors, again, reach out to support and we'll help you walk through that process. When it comes to AWS, we do have virtual appliances that run in AWS. We just need to make sure that permissions are correct for the directory for the EC2 user, as well as when you configure the S3 bucket to collect AWS flow logs, we have the correct fields. But again, you can reach out to support and we can walk you through those processes. So once we've understood the preparations that need to be made, we can jump forward into the actual upgrade process. So after we've tested whether or not this system is online, we can follow the documentation for either just straight upgrading to 19.4 using the online process, or we can fast forward to the offline upgrade. We'll walk through both briefly, but we'll get to offline next. So as all of our instructions start with, number one is to take a backup. Follow the upgrade preparation steps from the previous page. Again, questions, please reach out to support. Next up is we're going to start a team-up session. As part of running something like a distributed upgrade, we want to make sure that once the upgrade process has started from the command line on the primary reporting server, that process does not get canceled. Teamux is an application we install on all Scrutinizer products. You start a new session that allows the upgrade process to run in the background if for whatever reason you lose VPN access or the SSH session times out or something along those lines. So with that open, we're going to then navigate to the temp directory. We start in the temp directory to be sure that any files that are created, any temporary files that are part of the upgrade process get cleared out. And then we will curl down the install file. Again, this comes from files.plixer.com. We will download that into that temp directory, and that's actually where we're going to run that from as well. So once that's downloaded, we can either re-download that checksum if we haven't done it before. Otherwise, we'll download that now. We can cat the information that's in that file and then check the SHA-256 checksum against the checksum file just to verify that we have the correct version of that upgrade script. From there, we just change permissions on that file. One thing to note about AWS is that we are going to want to make sure that the EC2 users' permissions are set correctly and can run files from that directory. It's another step. Once we've done that, we are going to either use the root user, the Plixer user, or the EC2 user in order to run the upgrade. We recommend using the Plixer user. If you question on how to switch from root to Plixer, again, support can definitely help with that. Once we run this install script, it's going to ask a bunch of questions. You're going to have to accept the EULA. There is upgrades from 18.20 is a question to say that we want to remove a data.old file. This is remnants of an older version 18 upgrade. This file can safely be removed. When we talk about distributed upgrades, again, we are always running the install process or the upgrade process from the primary reporting server. As part of that, the installer is going to ask on how we are going to connect from the primary to those collectors. There are a couple of options, but we would recommend to use the existing option. In version 19, Scrutinizer already has SSH keys that are configured between the primary and the collectors. So selecting existing as part of that upgrade will tell it to use that. If you're on version 18 or 20 or 1820 or below, we cannot run with the existing keys because they have not been created until you are on version 19. So we'll use the password. The password we're going to use is the Plixer user's password on each of the collectors. Again, there are a few other questions about whether or not you have a backup. Follow the prompt. As the upgrade process finishes on each of the collectors, each one of those collectors is going to be added back into the cluster, and then a reboot is going to happen of the entire cluster. This reboot is to make sure that we are currently running on the newest kernel version, and any RPM versions that are any RPM packages that have been updated are using the most recent version. Once that's finished, we can log back in. We have a couple of commands here, the scrututil commands, which I'm sure some of you are aware, but these will just give us a little bit of an idea of how the system is running after that upgrade. These commands will output that the database is running, the API process is running, and the collector itself is running. So again, as part of any of these processes, if you don't feel comfortable going through the upgrade on your own, you can always reach out to support. We'll get into how you can contact support in just a minute. But at any time, we can schedule a call, we can answer quick emails, however it is to make this as easy as a process as it could be for you.
Awesome. Thank you, Ryan. So I think
are there some questions that have come up? Sorry.
Yeah, I think at this point, we can probably take some questions from the audience. Yeah. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, we have a bunch of questions actually, Adam. So one question is, will the update require any changes to our current setup or integration with other tools?
That sounds like a question for you, Ryan.
Yes, we always want to have a backup of any special configurations you've done on the system, but the upgrade, as long as you are on 1820 or version 19, should not affect your integrations.
Okay, we also have, is there any new training or support available for the new features?
Excellent question. So yes, there is. This webinar is first step of that process. You can either reach out to your sales rep and get some time with them to do, we like to call it a health or systems check. At that time, we can walk you through a couple things. We can make sure your system's running pretty well from a high level, and then we can also answer any questions around new features. So I would encourage you, if that's of interest, that'd be probably my first stop. And then I'm sure if you have any ongoing support tickets, Ryan and his team are probably more than equipped to do the same.
Of course.
Cool. All right. We also have some questions coming in through the chat. So someone's asking the best way to reconfirm their version. This person thinks he's running an older version.
Yeah,
Adam, if you want to pull up Scrutinizer again, we can show that.
Yeah, if you're running an older version, you're probably in classic, more of the classic UI. And Ryan, correct, keep me honest here. I believe the best way is probably just to use this little down caret, right? And that tells you the version you're at, right in that drop down.
Yes, version 1820 and below will not have the new UI. That is a version 19 feature. So you'll be on this interface that we're looking at here, and you can use that drop down right next to the log out option to show exactly what version you're running.
Okay. And then somebody's also asking if you can again review how you're able to show the user on the earlier alert. Oh, how you're able to show the user on the earlier alert that we showed in the demo.
Yeah, happy to, right? So there's a couple ways to get user information into Scrutinizer. The one way to do it is through an exporter you already have that provides that information. For me, what comes to mind are things like Palo Alto firewalls are a great source of that if you have those already and have that feature turned on. Another way to do it is through what we call Active Directory User. It is one of our add-ons that we provide that allows you to pull information out of Active Directory. And so we actually scrape through like a Windows event forwarding to like a web collector. We'll actually scrape that collector's event log for login, log out events pertaining to Active Directory users and pull that information back into Scrutinizer as well. That's probably the two most common ways that I've seen it done.
Let's see, we have some other questions. How do we handle data migration if needed for this update?
If you're migrating to a new instance, then the full database backup is the best way to migrate all of that data from the old system to the new. There is no requirement to do any sort of migration as part of the update. The update can be done in place. Again, we want to have a backup for any disaster recovery. This is still software, but if you want to take that backup, like I said, the snapshot of the virtual machine, take the full database backup, or configuration only is your best option.
And looks like we have one more question here. Will there be any downtime required to implement this update? And if so, how long will it last?
The update we've seen takes anywhere, it's dependent on the amount of data you have stored in the system. We've seen these upgrades finish in 10 minutes all the way up to on larger distributed systems. If you have multiple collectors, the process can take an hour. An hour and a half, I would say, is probably the longest that I've seen on a maybe 4 collector system.
And also with regard to the update, how does the update affect the system's overall scalability and performance?
The performance benefits going from the earlier versions of 19 is quite large. So we've done a lot of optimization with how we pull data from the database, how we're using that inside of Flow Analytics. So there will be a large performance increase, especially around things like AWS Flow Log Collection or the Azure Flow Log Collection.
And also, is there a detailed change log or documentation available for this update?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like Adam's navigating it there, but yes, that's on our online documentation.
Yeah, so that's going to be per version. So you can come in here, find your version, and view the change log from there.
And I think we have, oh, wait, we have, oh, how will the update impact our current data and saved configurations?
All of your configurations will be saved as part of the upgrade.
So
yes, the update will not change your current configurations.
And I think we covered most of our questions for all of them. Oh, wait, one more. What are the minimum system requirements for the new version?
Adam, if you want to jump back over into the online documentation there, the system requirements are all based off of the features that you're using in your current configuration. So the sizing guide on the website bases the amount of CPU cores and memory that's required is based off of the amount of flow data that you're receiving and the exporter count. So you can see with a small install, 5,000 flows per second and 5 exporters requires 4 CPU cores and 8 gigs of memory. That scales up depending on the amount of exporters and flow rate you have. There are some other factors around the features that we have enabled, how many of those flow analytic algorithms are running, how many devices are added to each of those. And the documentation here does a good job of breaking down how much more resources will be required depending on each feature.
Okay, I think, oh, wait, somebody's asking in chat, can you forward alerts to Splunk?
Absolutely. I think many of our customers do that today. If not Splunk, someone on any other SIM, we can forward events to. They can be forwarded as either syslog, they can be forwarded as Ceph formatted messaging. We'll support SNMP traps. So there's a number of ways we can get that data over to a SIM of some type.
Right. This would be done through the notification profiles, and then taking those profiles and assigning them to each one of the algorithms or the policies that you would like to send data, or containing the information you'd like to send to Splunk.
And one of our attendees is interested in online or in-person training. So how could they arrange for that?
That's a great question. So we do support both. I'd say reach out to your sales rep. They can talk to you about that. If you don't know who your sales rep is, reach out to myself or anyone on this webinar, and we can direct you to the right person.
So I think we've covered all our questions. Anyone has any other questions, feel free to just throw them in the chat.
Yeah, I think we're probably good then. Just to build on that, so if you do have any questions after the webinar, again, email us, really anyone at Plixer, but there's a sales.plixer.com. If you have a question on this webinar and you send it to that email address, I'm sure they'll route it to us, no problem. So reach out if you have any questions. We're always happy to have a conversation or help you get more value out of the tool.
And to all the attendees, we will be sending this copy of the recording out to you all. So if you need to go back and revisit the webinar, you will have the recording available to you. So thanks everyone for attending. And we all hope you have a great day, and keep your eyes peeled for more webinars coming from the Plixer crew. Thanks so much.